Have you ever felt silence? Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that screams, the kind where 500 people hold their breath as your heart shatters on the floor. Elara Vance stood in her white lace gown, ready to say, "I do," only to hear the man she loved say, "I can't." Rejected, humiliated, left with nothing but the rain and a broken spirit. She ran into the woods to die, but she didn't know that her pain had a scent. And deep in the shadows, a king, a predator everyone feared caught that scent. He didn't come to hunt her. He came to claim the queen who had been thrown away like trash. This is the story of left at the altar, she ran. You might want to grab some tissues for this one. The stained glass windows of St. Jude's Chapel in North Creek usually painted the floor in kaleidoscopes of red, blue, and gold. Today, however, the sky outside was a bruised purple, casting a grey, sickly pallor over the congregation. Elara Vance stood at the altar, her hands trembling so violently that the bouquet of calla lilies shook, dropping a single white petal onto the marble floor. It landed near the polished black dress shoes of Marcus Thorne. Marcus was the beta of the Silver River Pack. He was handsome in a conventional safe way, sandy blonde hair, a jawline that looked carved from granite, and eyes that usually held warmth. Today those eyes were glacial. "Marcus?" Elara whispered. The silence in the church was heavy, pressing against her eardrums. The officiant, an elder named Thomas, looked between them nervously. "We're at the vows, Marcus." Marcus didn't look at her. He looked over her shoulder toward the front row, where the high-ranking pack members sat. "I can't do this, Elara." The whisper ripple started instantly. It sounded like a swarm of hornets rising from the pews. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. She took a step forward, reaching for his hand, but he recoiled as if she were made of burning coal. "What are you talking about?" she choked out. "The mating ceremony. The moon aligns tonight. We've been together for 4 years. 4 years of me settling," Marcus said, his voice suddenly booming, ensuring the back row heard him. He straightened his tuxedo jacket. "I need a mate who strengthens the pack's lineage. I need a she-wolf with power, with status, not an omega whose wolf hasn't even fully manifested." The cruelty of the words was a physical blow. Elara staggered back. "But you said you didn't care about rank. You said you loved me." "I have a duty to the Silver River," Marcus shouted, his facade of calmness breaking, "and I won't pollute my bloodline with a weak link." Then the doors of the vestry opened. The sound of heels clicking against the marble echoed like gunshots. Serafina walked out. She was the daughter of the pack's gamma, tall with raven-black hair and a smirk that could cut glass. She wasn't wearing a bridesmaid dress. She was wearing white. A collective gasp went through the room. "Marcus needs a real partner," Serafina purred, sliding her arm through Marcus's. She looked at Elara with mock pity. "And he needs a woman who can actually give him an heir. Unlike you, Elara, I'm already carrying the future beta." She placed a manicured hand on her stomach. Elara felt the room spin. The betrayal wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. This had been planned. The dress, the timing, the pregnancy. They had let her walk down the aisle, let her put on the dress, let her family sit in the pews just to execute her socially in front of everyone. Elara looked at her parents in the second row. Her father, a low-ranking warrior, looked down at his shoes. Her mother was crying, but not in anger, in shame. They wouldn't stand up for her. Against the beta, against the gamma's daughter. They were too afraid. "Get out!" Marcus said, his voice cold and final. "The ceremony continues, but the bride has changed. You're kicking me out of my own wedding," Elara whispered, the tears finally spilling over hot and acidic. "It was never your wedding, Ilara." Serafina laughed, a tinkling, cruel sound. "It was the Beta's wedding. You were just a placeholder." Ilara looked around the room. 500 faces. Friends she grew up with, the baker who made her cake, the teachers who taught her history. No one moved. No one spoke. The pack hierarchy was absolute, and she was at the bottom. She dropped the bouquet. It hit the floor with a wet thud. Ilara turned. She didn't run immediately. She forced herself to walk spine straight past the rows of pitying and mocking eyes. But the moment she pushed through the heavy oak doors and the cold autumn air hit her face, the composure shattered. She ripped the veil from her hair, tearing out bobby pins and strands of brown locks with it. She hiked up the heavy satin skirt and ran. She didn't run toward the parking lot where her father's old sedan was parked. She ran toward the tree line, toward the dense, unforgiving forest of the Grizzly Peaks. She didn't care that a storm was brewing. She didn't care that she was in a wedding dress. She just needed to be somewhere where no one could see the Omega who was left for something better. The forest of Grizzly Peaks was not safe for a lone wolf, certainly not for a human form Omega in a wedding dress. The terrain was jagged, filled with ravines and slate rock that sliced through leather, let alone satin. Ilara had been running for an hour. The adrenaline that had fueled her flight from the church had burned off, replaced by a searing ache in her lungs, and the freezing bite of the rain. The storm had broken, turning the dirt paths into rivers of mud. Her dress, once a pristine symbol of hope, was now a heavy grey shroud dragging her down. The lace sleeves were torn, snagged on brambles that had drawn blood on her arms. "Pollute my bloodline." Marcus's voice echoed in her head, louder than the thunder. "Placeholder." She tripped over a protruding root, landing hard on her hands and knees. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She cried out a raw, guttural sound of frustration and agony. She curled into a ball in the mud, the rain plastering her hair to her face. "Why?" she screamed at the darkening canopy. "What did I do wrong?" She lay there shivering violently. The temperature was dropping rapidly. In the distance she heard the howl of a timber wolf, wild, not shifter. She was trespassing on the borderlands, the lawless strip of territory between the Silver River Pack and the lands of the North. The North was forbidden. It belonged to the Blood Moon Pack. Legend said their alpha was a monster, a man who had killed his own father to take the throne, a king who ruled with silence and violence. Ilara closed her eyes. Let the rogue wolves come, she thought. Let the cold take me. It's better than seeing Marcus hold Serafina's baby. But she wasn't alone. 3 miles away on a ridge overlooking the valley, a figure stood motionless in the rain. He was massive, standing nearly 6'5", with shoulders that strained against a black tactical coat. He wasn't shifting, but his senses were fully extended. He was Caleb Sterling, the Alpha King of the Blood Moon. He had been tracking a group of rogue bears that had been harassing his northern borders, but suddenly the wind shifted. It wasn't the scent of bear. It wasn't the scent of wet pine or ozone. It was the scent of anguish. To an alpha of his caliber, emotions had scents. Fear smelled like sulfur. Anger smelled like burning copper. But this smelled like crushed vanilla and salt. It was the scent of a soul being ripped in half. And beneath that, something sweeter. Something that made his inner wolf, a beast that had been dormant and bored for years, suddenly pace against the bars of his mind. Mate. The word whispered through his consciousness, primal and undeniable. Caleb frowned. His mate. Here. in the middle of a torrential storm on the edge of his territory. He didn't hesitate. He moved with a speed that defied physics, blurring through the trees. He didn't run. He hunted. He followed the trail of vanilla and salt, the scent growing stronger, mixed with the metallic tang of fresh blood. Elara had stopped shivering. Hypothermia was setting in, bringing with it a dangerous, sleepy warmth. She watched the rain fall through the trees, her vision blurring. She heard the crunch of boots on twigs. Heavy boots. "If you're going to kill me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Make it quick." The footsteps stopped. The rain seemed to deflect off the figure standing above her. She forced her eyes to focus. He was terrifying. That was her first thought. He had dark hair, wet and messy, and a scar running through his left eyebrow. His eyes were the color of molten gold, the sign of an alpha, but brighter, more intense than any she had ever seen. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like the Grim Reaper. Caleb looked down at the pathetic bundle of wet lace and mud. He saw the ruined wedding dress. He saw the bruises starting to form on her arms. He smelled the stench of another male on her stale, fading rejected. Rage, hot and white, flared in his chest. Someone had hurt his mate. Someone had left her in the dirt to die. He knelt, his movements surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. "I'm not going to kill you," Caleb said. His voice was a low rumble, like thunder trapped in a canyon. It vibrated in Elara's chest. He reached out his hand, hovering over her cheek. "But whoever put you here, I can't promise the same for them." Elara tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't obey. I'm nobody. Just an omega." "You are not a nobody," Caleb growled softly. He slid his arms under her, one under her knees, one behind her back, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Elara's head lolled against his chest. He smelled like winter cedarwood and raw power. It was intoxicating. For the first time in hours, the pain in her chest dulled, replaced by a spark of safety. "Sleep," he commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an alpha command, but laced with protection rather than dominance. As Elara's eyes fluttered shut, she thought she was hallucinating, because the last thing she heard before the darkness took her was the monster of the north whispering, "I've got you. You're mine now." Elara woke up to the sound of a crackling fire and the smell of roasting meat. She shot up, gasping, her hand flying to her chest. She wasn't in the mud. She wasn't in the rain. She was in a bed, a massive four-poster bed made of dark mahogany, covered in furs that were softer than anything she had ever touched. Panic set in. She scanned the room. It was rustic, but undeniably expensive. Stone walls, high vaulted ceilings with exposed beams, and a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over a snow-dusted forest. "You're awake." She flinched, pulling the fur sheet up to her chin. Caleb was sitting in a leather armchair by the fire, reading a book. He had changed. Gone was the tactical coat, replaced by a simple grey cable-knit sweater that did nothing to hide the width of his shoulders. He closed the book and stood up. Elara pressed herself against the headboard. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Who are you?" "You're in my home, Blackwood Ridge," Caleb said, walking slowly toward the bed. He stopped a respectful distance away, sensing her fear. "And I'm Caleb." Caleb. The name triggered a memory from her childhood lessons on pack politics. Caleb Sterling, the Blood Moon Alpha. "The king," she breathed, her eyes widening. I trespassed. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Elara, breathe," he interrupted. He knew her name. How did he know her name? "I checked your ID in the car you left at the church. My scouts found it." He hadn't just found her. He had sent wolves back into Silver River territory to retrieve her things. "Why?" she asked, tears pricking her eyes again. The memory of the wedding rushed back, the rejection. Seraphina's hand on her stomach. Why help me? I'm a rejected Omega. I have no value. Caleb's jaw tightened. He moved closer, sitting on the edge of the mattress. The mattress dipped under his weight. His golden eyes locked onto hers, burning with intensity. Who rejected you? Marcus Thorne, she whispered. The beta of Silver River. Caleb let out a short, dark laugh. Thorne, the man is an idiot. He wanted someone with a better bloodline. Seraphina, she's pregnant. Caleb tilted his head, studying her. He could smell the lie, not from Elara, but the lingering scent of deceit that clung to her story. And you believe that defines your value? A title, a bloodline. That's how the world works, Elara said bitterly. Alphas want strong mates. Betas want strong mates. Omegas are just there. Look at me, Caleb commanded. She looked at. I am the Alpha King. I have the strongest bloodline on this continent. Do you know what I smell when I look at you? Elara shook her head. I don't smell an Omega, Caleb said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I smell the storm. I smell resilience. And he hesitated, deciding not to reveal the mate bond just yet. She was too fragile. If he told her they were fated, she might think he was just obligated to save her. He wanted her to know he chose her. I smell a queen who hasn't found her crown yet. He reached to the bedside table and picked up a mug. Drink. Herbal tea. It will help with the shock. Elara took the mug, her fingers brushing his. A spark of static electricity snapped between them, loud and visible. Elara gasped and pulled back. Caleb didn't flinch. He just watched her with a satisfied glint in his eyes. Rest, Elara, Caleb said, standing up. You are safe here. No one from Silver River can touch you. If Marcus Thorne steps 1 foot across my border to look for you, I will mount his head on my gate. He won't look for me, Elara said softly, looking into the dark tea. He made it very clear I was easily replaced. Then he is a fool, Caleb said, walking to the door. He paused his hand on the iron latch. And he has just made the biggest mistake of his life, because he didn't just lose a bride, Elara. He handed his greatest weapon to his enemy. He left the room, closing the door softly. Elara sat in the silence, the warmth of the tea spreading through her hands. For the first time in 24 hours, she didn't feel like a victim. She replayed his words. He handed his greatest weapon to his enemy. What did Caleb see in her downstairs? Caleb walked into his war room. His beta, a scarred warrior named Silas, was waiting. Did you find out why Thorne rejected her? Caleb asked, his voice shedding the gentleness he used in the bedroom, becoming cold and commanding. Yes, Alpha, Silas said, handing him a folder. It seems the Gamma's daughter Seraphina bribed the pack doctor. The pregnancy is real, but the child isn't Marcus's. It belongs to a rogue she was seeing in secret. Caleb smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had cornered its prey. So Marcus rejected his true mate for a lie. Caleb mused. Hold on to this information, Silas. We won't release it yet. Why not, sir? Because, Caleb said, looking up at the ceiling toward the room where Elara slept. Elara needs to build herself up first. She needs to become the woman who can destroy him herself. I'm not just going to save her, Silas. I'm going to train her. Caleb walked to the window, looking south toward the Silver River territory. Prepare the training grounds, Caleb ordered, and send a message to the council. Tell them the Blood Moon King is taking a protege. Let them wonder. Let Marcus Thorne shake in his boots, wondering what I'm planning. And the wedding dress, sir? Silas asked. What should we do with it? Burn it, Caleb said. She won't be wearing white next time. She'll be wearing red. 2 weeks at Blackwood Ridge had changed Alara physically, at least. The hollows in her cheeks carved by years of emotional neglect and the acute trauma of the wedding had filled out thanks to the rich game-heavy diet of the northern pack. The scratches from her frantic run through the woods had faded to thin pink lines against her pale skin. But inside, she was still a mess of jagged edges. She spent most of her days in the massive library, burying herself in histories of wolf packs, trying to understand a world that had only ever told her she didn't matter. Caleb gave her space, but his presence was a constant heavy weight in the house. She felt him before she saw him, a shift in air pressure, a scent of deep wilderness that made her inner wolf, usually so quiet, prick its ears. One crisp morning, Alara was watching the sunrise turn the snow-capped peaks fiery orange. She didn't hear him enter the room, but the hairs on her arms stood straight up. "You're healing," Caleb said from behind her. His voice was low, rough with sleep. Alara turned. He was wearing a dark t-shirt that clung to a chest rippling with muscle. It was distracting. Physically, yes. "Thank you for your hospitality, Alpha Sterling. I should probably be moving on soon. Find a human town, maybe." Caleb's golden eyes narrowed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Moving on. To do what wait tables, hide your scent with cheap perfume until some other low-level wolf sniffs you out and decides you're easy prey." His harshness stung, but Alara held her ground. "It's better than being a charity case here. I know what Omegas are, Caleb. We are disposable." Caleb moved so fast she didn't have time to flinch. He crowded her against the cold glass of the window, his hands planted on either side of her head, caging her in. He leaned down his nose, inches from hers, inhaling deeply. "Stop saying that word," he growled. "You were told you were an Omega by weak men who feared what you could become if you weren't oppressed. Your wolf isn't weak, Alara. She's starving." He pushed off the glass and strode toward the door. "Get dressed in something durable. Meet me on the training grounds in 20 minutes. "I don't know how to fight," she stammered. He stopped at the doorway, looking back over his shoulder with a grim smile. "Then it's going to be a very long morning. You wanted a new life, Alara. You have to bleed for it." The training grounds of the Blood Moon Pack were brutal. It was an expanse of packed earth and granite outcrops ringed by imposing pines. The air here was thinner, sharper. Caleb didn't train her himself that first day. He handed her over to Silas, his beta. Silas was terrifying in a different way than Caleb. Where Caleb was a brooding storm, Silas was a precise, unyielding machine. "The Alpha believes you have potential," Silas said, circling her. He threw a padded staff at her feet. "Prove him right." The next 3 hours were pure hell. Alara had never thrown a punch in her life. The Silver River Pack believed Omegas were meant for domestic duties, cooking, cleaning, raising others' children. They were explicitly forbidden from combat training lest they get ideas. Silas didn't take it easy on her. He knocked her down repeatedly. She tasted dirt and blood. Her muscles screamed in protest. "Get up!" Silas barked, looming over her as she lay gasping in the mud. "Is this what you did when Marcus Thorne abandoned you? Did you just lie down and take it?" The mention of Marcus was like a shot of adrenaline. Anger, hot and blinding, flared in her chest. "No!" she rasped, forcing herself to her knees. "Then fight back!" Silas swung the staff at her midsection. It should have connected. It should have knocked the wind out of her again. But something instinctive took over. Alara didn't think. Her body reacted. She dropped low, rolling under the strike, and lashed out with her leg. It wasn't graceful. It was a desperate, clumsy scramble, but her heel connected solidly with the back of Silas's knee. The massive beta buckled. He didn't fall, but he stumbled, catching himself on one hand. Silence fell over the training ground. Other warriors paused their sparring to look. Silas stood up slowly, wiping mud from his hands. He looked at Elara, who was panting eyes wide with shock at what she'd just done. Silas gave a slow, approving nod. Sloppy form. Good instincts. Again. Up on the balcony, overlooking the grounds, Caleb watched his knuckles white as he gripped the iron railing. He had felt the flare of her anger through the bond, a sudden sharp spike of power that tasted like ozone. He had wanted to rush down there every time Silas knocked her down. His alpha instincts screamed at him to protect his mate, but he knew that protecting her now would cripple her later. She needed to break her own chains. He watched as she picked up the staff, her stance steadier this time. She was learning. That evening, Elara could barely move. She was covered in bruises, and every muscle fiber felt torn. She sat by the fire in the main hall, staring blankly into the flames. Caleb appeared with a small jar of pungent-smelling salve. Without asking, he knelt before her and took her hand, pushing up her sleeve to reveal a nasty purple bruise on her forearm. "Silas is a brute," Caleb muttered gently, massaging the salve into her skin. His touch was incredibly tender, a stark contrast to the violence of the morning. The heat from his hands seeped deep into her bones, chasing away the ache. "He's effective," Elara whispered, wincing slightly. She looked at the Alpha King kneeling before her. It was an impossibly intimate scene. "Why are you doing this, Caleb? Why do you care if I can fight?" Caleb didn't look up from her arm. He couldn't tell her yet that every bruise on her skin felt like a bruise on his own soul. "Because the world is full of Marcus Thorns," he said quietly. "And I won't always be there to catch you when you fall. Next time, I want you to be the one doing the breaking." He finished with her arm and looked up. His golden eyes were swirling with emotions she couldn't pass: possessiveness, pride, and a simmering hunger that made her breath hitch. "You did well today, Elara," he said, his voice vibrating in her chest. "You aren't an Omega. You're a survivor. Now we just need to turn you into a warrior." Elara looked at the fire, feeling the strange warmth of his praise. For 4 years, Marcus had only ever criticized her, told her to be quieter, smaller. Caleb, this terrifying king of the north, wanted her to be bigger, to take up space. For the first time since the altar, Elara didn't feel like running. She felt like digging her heels in. While Elara bled on the training grounds of the north, things in the Silver River Pack were beginning to rot. Marcus Thorne sat in his office, rubbing his temples. The paperwork was piling up. Since he had taken over most of the Alpha duties, the actual Alpha was elderly and failing fast. He realized just how much work Elara used to do in the background. She had organized schedules, managed supply lines, and smoothed over interpack squabbles, all without credit. Now things were falling through the cracks. And then there was Serafina. The door to his office burst open, and Serafina stalked in. She was already showing her belly a noticeable bump under her tight cashmere sweater. "We need to talk about the nursery, Marcus," she demanded, tossing a catalogue onto his desk, scattering important border reports. "The colours the Omega chose before she left are hideous. I want imported Italian cribs." Marcus looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Serafina, we have budget issues. The Western Patrol reports rogue activity increasing, and we're short on funds because of the wedding costs." "Not my problem," she sniffed, examining her perfect nails. "Your son deserves the best. You're the beta. Make it happen. unless you want everyone to think you can't provide for your real family. Marcus grit his teeth. Your son. She used that phrase like a cudgel every time he hesitated. He looked at the woman he had blown up his life for. She was beautiful, yes, but cold and vain. There was no warmth in her, no quiet support like Alara used to offer. A sharp pang of regret twisted in his gut. He pushed it down. Alara was gone, probably dead in the Grizzly Peaks by now. He had made his choice. He had to live with it. I'll handle it, he said curtly. Now get out, I have work to do. Serafina glared at him, but turned and left. As she exited Marcus's head tracker, a wiry wolf named Jax slipped in. Jax looked nervous. Beta Thorn, Jax said, keeping his head low. I have unusual news from the northern border. Marcus sat up straighter. The north was supposed to be quiet, the truce with the Blood Moon Pack held by a thread. Speak. I was tracking a deer trail near the Shadow Creek ravine, Jax said. I crossed into the neutral zone. I saw activity on the Blood Moon training grounds. And, Marcus snapped, they train, they're savages, that's what they do. Yes, sir. But I saw her. Marcus froze. The air left the room. Who? Alara Vance, sir. Marcus stood up so fast his chair crashed backward against the wall. You're lying. She ran into the storm in a wedding dress. She's dead. I know her scent, sir. Vanilla and salt. It was her. She was alive. And... Jax hesitated, swallowing hard. And what? Marcus roared, slamming his hands on the desk. She was sparring with Silas their beta, and Alpha Sterling was watching her, like a hawk watches a prize. Marcus felt a wave of nausea that quickly curdled into blinding rage. Alara alive, and with him, the butcher of the north. The thought of Alara, his Alara, the meek little Omega, who worshipped the ground he walked on, being in the territory of another male, especially one as powerful as Caleb Sterling, was unbearable. It was an insult to his pride, to his ownership. Get a squad ready, Marcus snarled, his eyes flashing beta orange. We're going to the border. But sir, the truce. To hell with the truce. That monster has stolen a member of our pack. Marcus didn't seem to care that he was the one who had thrown her away. In his mind, she was still his property. Back at Blackwood Ridge, the atmosphere had shifted. Caleb had received the intel from his border guards the moment Jax had spotted Alara. He knew Marcus knew. The game had officially begun. He found Alara in the armory, cleaning the mud off the staff she had used that morning. She looked exhausted, but sturdier. There was a new set to her jaw. Come with me, Caleb said. His voice was devoid of the warmth it sometimes held during their evening talks. This was the Alpha King speaking. Alara dropped the rag and followed him without question. He led her not to the library, but to his private study, a room few ever entered. He walked behind a massive oak desk and pulled a thick manila folder from a locked drawer. He threw it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. What is this? Alara asked, warily approaching the desk. The truth, Caleb said. The reason your life fell apart. Alara looked at him, then at the folder. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. She opened the first page. It was a medical report. Subject Serafina Croft. Gestation period consistent with conception date approximately 8 weeks prior to the wedding. Alara frowned, doing the math. 8 weeks before the wedding. But Marcus was away on a diplomatic mission then. He was gone for a month. Keep reading, Caleb urged, his voice tight. She turned the page. It was a transcript of financial transactions. Large sums of money, wired from Serafina's personal account to the pack doctor. And the final document, a paternity test secured by Silas's spies. Probability of paternity Marcus Thorne, 0%. Biological father identified as rogue male, currently deceased. Ilara stared at the words until they blurred. The room went deathly silent. The roaring in her ears drowned out the crackle of the fire. It was all a lie. The baby wasn't Marcus's. He hadn't left her for a stronger bloodline. He had left her for a cuckoo's egg, planted in his nest by a manipulative social climber. She didn't cry. The tears she had shed at the altar seemed to belong to a different person now. Instead, a cold, creeping numbness spread through her veins, freezing her heart. She remembered Marcus's righteous indignation at the altar. I won't pollute my bloodline. He had humiliated her before the entire pack, broken her heart, and sent her out to die, all for a woman who was playing him for the greatest fool in history. Ilara slowly closed the folder. She looked up at Caleb. Her brown eyes, usually soft as melted chocolate, were now hard as flint. "You knew," she said, her voice flat. "How long have you known? Since the second day you were here." Caleb admitted. He didn't apologize. "Why didn't you tell me?" Caleb walked around the desk, stopping inches from her. "Because 2 weeks ago, this information would have broken you. You would have cried for him. You would have wondered why you weren't enough to keep him from being tricked." He reached out, tilting her chin up so she had to look at him. The intensity of his golden gaze was almost painful. "Look at me and tell me what you feel now, Ilara. Do you want to go back to him and tell him the truth? Try to win him back?" Ilara laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound, devoid of humor. The love she had nurtured for Marcus for 4 years withered and died, in that instant turned to ash by the searing heat of betrayal. "Win him back," she whispered. The anger from the training ground returned, but this time it wasn't a flare, it was an inferno. "He left me to die for a lie. He deserves everything that's coming to him." She stepped back from Caleb's touch, needing space for the rage that was vibrating under her skin. "I don't want him back, Caleb," she vowed, her voice rising, echoing slightly, as her inner wolf finally woke up, snarling in agreement. "I want to destroy him. I want to take everything from him, just like he took everything from me. I want Serafina exposed. I want Marcus broken." Caleb smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile that promised violence. His mate had finally arrived. "Good," the Alpha King growled. "Then let's go to war." The tension between the Silver River Pack and the Blood Moon Pack had always been a taut wire waiting to snap. 3 days after Ilara read the file in Caleb's study, that wire broke. Marcus Thorne did not come quietly. Driven by a bruised ego and the whispering poison of Serafina, who was terrified, her secret was about to unravel and needed Ilara. Silenced Marcus mobilized the Silver River elites. He claimed that the Blood Moon Alpha had kidnapped a vulnerable pack member and was holding her hostage. It was a lie, but it was a lie that gave him a casus belli, a cause for war. The meeting point was the Iron Bridge, a rusted industrial structure spanning the gorge that separated the two territories. Below the river churned white and violent, swollen from the recent storms. It was dusk. The sky was a bruised purple, mirroring the day Ilara had been left at the altar. Marcus stood on the south side of the bridge, flanked by 20 of his best enforcers. He wore his tactical vest, his face set in a mask of righteous fury. But beneath the anger, there was unease. The air tasted metallic. "Come out, Sterling," Marcus bellowed, his voice carrying over the roar of the water. "Return the Omega, and I will leave your borders intact." On the north side, the mist parted. Caleb Sterling did not bring an army. He brought only 4 people, himself, his beta Silas, 2 guards, and Ilara. But this was not the Elara that Marcus remembered. The woman who stepped out of the mist wasn't wearing a tattered wedding dress or oversized borrowed clothes. She was dressed in fitted black combat leathers that hugged her new muscle definition. Over her shoulders she wore a heavy cloak of deep blood red wool, the color of the Alpha's household. Her hair, once limp and messy, was braided back, tightly revealing a face that had lost its softness. Her eyes were dry, her chin was high. Marcus felt a jolt of shock. She looked magnificent, and she looked dangerous. "She is not a hostage, Thorn," Caleb said. His voice didn't need to be shouted. The alpha power behind it carried it effortlessly across the gorge. "She is a citizen of the Blood Moon now. She is Silver River property." Marcus spat, stepping onto the bridge. The metal groaned under his boots. "She was born in my pack. She belongs to me." Elara stepped forward. Caleb didn't stop her. He stood just behind her, a silent, looming shadow of protection, but he let her take the lead. "I belong to no one," Elara said. Her voice was steady, cold as the river below. "I ceased to belong to Silver River the moment you left me kneeling on that altar, Marcus." Marcus sneered, walking closer, until they were only 10 yards apart in the center of the bridge. "I did what I had to do for the pack, Elara. You were weak. You are weak. Playing dress-up in Sterling's clothes doesn't change what you are. An Omega. And you—" Elara countered, tilting her head. "What are you, Marcus, a beta, who thinks he's an Alpha A man, who thinks he's a leader? I am the future of my pack." Marcus roared, his eyes flashing orange. "I made a sacrifice. I chose a mate who carries the future." Elara laughed. It was the same dry laugh from the study, and it unnerved Marcus more than a growl would have. "The future," she repeated. She reached into a cloak. Marcus flinched his hand, going to the knife at his belt, but she didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a thick, yellow envelope. "Is this the future you're talking about?" She threw the envelope. It slid across the rusted metal grating, stopping at Marcus's feet. "What is this?" "Read it," Elara commanded. Marcus hesitated, looking at his enforcers, then down at the envelope. He bent down and tore it open. As he read the paternity test results and the bank transfers, his face went from red to a sickly, pale grey. This is fake," he stammered, looking up. His eyes were wide, desperate. "You forged this. Seraphina is carrying my heir. Seraphina is carrying the child of a rogue named Kellen." Elara said, her voice projecting to the Silver River enforcers standing behind Marcus. "A rogue. She paid to sleep with her, because she knew you couldn't get the job done, Marcus." The enforcers began to murmur. The humiliation was absolute. Marcus Thorn, the man who had publicly rejected his childhood sweetheart for genetic superiority, had been cuckolded by a rogue. "Lies," Marcus screamed. He crumpled the paper. "You're trying to ruin me because I didn't want you, because you're nothing. You're a barren, useless Omega." He lunged. It was a cowardly move. He shifted mid-leap, his body contorting into a large grey wolf, aiming for Elara's throat. Caleb moved to intercept a roar tearing from his throat, but he stopped. Elara didn't flinch. She didn't shift. She dropped her center of gravity, just as Silas had taught her. As the massive grey wolf sailed through the air, she didn't try to overpower him. She used his momentum. She sidestepped with a fluidity that was almost supernatural, grabbing the fur at the scruff of his neck and using her own weight to swing him. Marcus crashed hard into the iron railing of the bridge. The metal shrieked. He hit the ground dazed, shifting back into human form, gasping for air. Before he could rise, Elara was on him. She placed her boot on his throat, pressing down just enough to cut off his air, but not enough to kill. I'm not a useless Omega, she hissed, leaning down so only he could hear the death in her voice. And I am not barren. My wolf was just waiting for a mate who was worthy of her. Marcus clawed at her boot, his eyes bulging. Then the final blow fell. Not from Ilara, but from Caleb. The Alpha King stepped forward, his golden eyes glowing like twin suns. The power rolling off him forced the Silver River enforcers to their knees. You trespassed on my land, Caleb thundered. You insulted my pack. But worst of all, Marcus Thorn. Caleb reached out and took Ilara's hand, interlacing their fingers. A visible shockwave of energy pulsed between them, gold and silver light that swirled around their joined hands. The mate bond. It flared to life, undeniable and blindingly bright. Marcus stopped struggling. He stared at the light. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. Ilara wasn't just a rejected lover. She was a true mate. And not just anyone's mate. She was the fated mate of the Alpha King. You rejected the Queen of the Blood Moon, Caleb said, his voice ringing with finality. And for that, you have lost everything. The return to the Silver River territory was a funeral march for the living. Marcus Thorn, once the golden boy of the pack, walked, with his head bowed the mud from the iron bridge, drying into a crust on his tactical vest. He wasn't in chains, but the silence of his own men weighed heavier than any shackle. When they reached the pack house, the news had already outpaced them. The documents Ilara had thrown the paternity test. The bank transfers, the medical records had been photographed and circulated by the enforcers who felt betrayed by their leader's incompetence. The pack was gathered on the lawn, but there were no cheers, only cold, hard stares. Serafina was already there, dragged out of the main house by 2 female warriors. She had been caught trying to load a duffel bag with pack silver and heirlooms. She was screaming mascara running down her face, blaming everyone but herself. But when she saw Marcus, she stopped screaming and started pleading. Marcus! Tell them it's a lie! She shrieked, her voice cracking. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. He didn't see the glamour or the status she had promised him. He saw a desperate, manipulative stranger, carrying another man's child, standing in the spot where Ilara used to wait for him, with hot coffee and a warm smile. Lock her up, Marcus croaked, his voice broken, and send a messenger to the rogues. Tell them if they want their child, they can come collect the mother. But Marcus's reckoning was far from over. Elder Thomas, the same old man who had officiated the disastrous wedding, stepped forward. He held the ceremonial dagger used for instating ranks. You have disgraced the bloodline you were so desperate to protect, Thomas said, his voice shaking with anger. You abandoned a loyal mate for a deceitful stranger. You led us to the brink of war based on a lie. You are unfit to lead. In front of the entire pack, Thomas reached out and sliced the beta insignia off Marcus's jacket. It fell to the grass, meaningless. You are stripped of rank, the elder announced. You are stripped of privilege. From this day forward you are Omega. You will clean the mess halls. You will wash the linens. You will serve those you thought you were better than. Marcus didn't fight it. He couldn't. He fell to his knees, the crushing weight of his regret finally collapsing his lungs. He had traded a diamond for a piece of broken glass, and the glass had cut his throat. 300 miles north, the air was crisp and smelled of pine needles and snow. The atmosphere at Blackwood Ridge was electric. The Blood Moon Pack had not gathered for a war, but for a coronation. Ilara stood in the Alpha's private quarters, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back was unrecognizable from the girl who had fled into the woods weeks ago. Her skin glowed with health, Her eyes held a fierce intelligence, and her posture was that of a warrior. She wore a gown of deep, midnight blue velvet that shimmered like the night sky. It was backless, revealing the faint scars of her journey, which she wore now as badges of honor. The door opened, and Caleb entered. The Alpha King stopped in his tracks. He was dressed in formal ceremonial blacks, his medals of war gleaming on his chest, but his eyes were soft, fixed solely on her. "You look—" Caleb started, his voice rough. "You look like the end of the world. In the best way." Ilara turned to him, a small smile playing on her lips. "Are you sure about this? Caleb, the pack? They expect a queen born of alpha blood. I'm just Ilara." Caleb crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. His thumbs brushed over her knuckles. "You are not just anything. You brought a tyrant to his knees without shedding a drop of blood. You survived the storm. You tamed the king. Blood doesn't make a queen, Ilara. Spirit does." He offered her his arm. "Ready to take your throne." "Ready," she whispered. They walked out into the courtyard together. 1,000 wolves stood in silence, surrounded by roaring bonfires that sent sparks spiraling up toward the full moon. As Ilara and Caleb ascended the stone dais, the silence broke, not with polite applause, but with a rhythmic stomping of feet, a heartbeat of the pack. Silas the Beta stood waiting with a bowl of ceremonial ink and water. "Tonight," Silas bellowed, his voice echoing off the mountains, "we witness the binding of the North. Alpha Caleb Sterling claims his fated mate." Caleb turned to Ilara. He didn't recite the traditional vows of protection and ownership. Instead, he spoke from the soul. "I spent my life building walls to keep the world out," Caleb said, his golden eyes burning into hers. "You walked right through them. You are my equal, my partner, my breath." Ilara's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. "I spent my life trying to be small, so I wouldn't be hurt," she replied, her voice ringing clear in the night air. "You gave me the sky so I could fly. I am yours, Caleb, today and every moon after." As they kissed, the bond between them snapped into place with the force of a lightning strike. A shockwave of pure energy rolled off the dais, knocking the wind out of the front row. It was then that the miracle happened. Ilara pulled back, gasping, her body vibrating with an intensity she had never felt. The moon seemed to spotlight her. Her bones cracked, reshaping, reforming. She fell to her hands and knees, but it wasn't a fall of weakness. It was a transformation. Fur erupted along her spine, not the brown patchy fur of a common omega. It was silver, pure, blinding, metallic silver. The crowd gasped, shouts of "Spirit Wolf" and "the Silver Ghost" rippled through the gathered wolves. Ilara stood up on 4 paws. She was massive, her shoulder height nearly matching Caleb's. Her coat shone like starlight, and her eyes were a glowing electric violet. The Silver Wolf was a myth, a creature said to be born only once every few generations, possessing power that could rival an entire army. Marcus hadn't just rejected a girl, he had rejected a deity. Caleb shifted instantly, his massive black timber wolf form towering next to her. The contrast was breathtaking, the shadow and the starlight, the Alpha King and the Spirit Queen. Ilara threw her head back and let out a howl. It wasn't a mournful sound. It was a song of victory, deep and resonant, carrying the weight of her pain and the height of her triumph. Caleb joined her, their voices intertwining in a harmony that shook the snow from the trees. The entire pack joined in a chorus of thousands, celebrating the rise of their new mother. Far to the south, scrubbing the grease from a warrior's boot in a cold, damp kennel, an omega named Marcus paused. The wind carried the faint, ghostly echo of a howl he would never forget. He dropped the brush. He sat on the dirty floor and put his head in his hands, listening to the sound of the life he could have had, ringing in the distance, like a bell he could never unring. In the north, the silver wolf and the black wolf ran. They cleared the castle walls in a single bound, racing toward the tree line, two apex predators disappearing into the endless wild night, free at last. And that is the story of how a rejected bride became the queen of the north. It's a brutal reminder that sometimes the worst thing that happens to us, the rejection, the humiliation, is actually the universe clearing the path for something greater. Marcus looked at a diamond and saw a rock simply because he didn't know how to shine it. But Caleb, he saw the light from miles away. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, and epic romance, please destroy that like button just like Ilara destroyed Marcus's ego. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, do you think Marcus deserved a harsher punishment, or is living with regret the ultimate torture? I'll see you in the next video.